It over to you.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you. Everyone should definitely, look to Yuri and support our affiliates. Our affiliates are the foundation of our success here at the Bucks County Association of Realtors. We have the best staff that anyone could ever ask for. And we have on here, we've got Lisa, we've got Anne Marie, and we've got Siobhan. They are three of our rock stars at the Bucks County Association of Realtors. Um, what I'd like to do first is I want to thank Eric for doing this today. I know he is busy and he's always engaged, and I just want to thank Eric for being a part of this today. And I'm going to let Eric do a quick intro, and then I'm going to tell you a real estate story about commercial, and then we're going to go into the program of what every residential realtor should know about commercial. So, Eric.
Sure, thanks, Frank. Yep, Eric Cornwell been, I don't know, like Lisa said, been doing this kind of my entire life because well, every summer that I had off, I was either painting curbs or doing tenant improvements or cleaning bathrooms in our own properties. So just been around commercial real estate forever. Mainly focused in industrial and multifamily. Surprisingly, those are similar, just from an underwriting standpoint, but that's kind of where we sit, and it kind of goes nationwide. We've done deals as far west as Arizona and north to Rhode Island, I don't know, south of Florida, wherever. Just kind of goes where investment takes us. So, yeah, overall, I mean, we've owned and operated and managed and developed, like developed our, I don't know, a couple million square feet of office, retail, and industrial product. We don't hang with the big boys in the big boxes that you'll see up, like going up towards the Poconos and stuff. That's just a bigger, that's a bigger game that we don't play in, but certainly dealt with interesting tenants and been doing this long enough to have seen a whole lot of stuff. So hopefully we bring some knowledge to you guys on the call here.
Eric, that's great. It's wonderful to have someone with a lifetime of experience in the realm. There's so many aspects to commercial, and we're going to hit them, or as many as we can today. So, I'll try to make my story as brief as possible. When I first got into real estate, I was able to do a commercial deal. I'm sure many of you have heard of Steven Starr with Steven Starr's restaurants down in Center City. Well, if you've ever heard of Frankfurt Hall or have been to Frankfurt Hall, that was my baby. I had a seller come crying into my office that he's getting foreclosed upon, and he needs help because they're going to take that building, they're going to take his apartment, they're going to take his house. It turned out that I knew the attorney representing the bank that was foreclosing on him. I had known his daughter in high school, and he said, Frank, I'll give you 30 days. We'll forbear the foreclosure proceedings for 30 days. You get a buyer. So lo and behold, I don't know, some of you may or may not know some of the big developers in Philadelphia. One of them, his name is Roland Cassis, and Roland has developed most of Northern Liberty and Fishtown. This story Roland has told at to the Fortune 500 when they interviewed him for an article, and Wharton School of Business has this story. It's a crazy story. So I get Roland to come by this building, and we're going to talk about risk and liability, and what you don't know can hurt you. So I don't know anything about it. This is $1.5 million building. It's my first commercial deal. And I get the buyer's in place. My seller decides that now that he's under contract, he's not going to pay me. He's like, we're not going to pay you. I'm just, like you're not going to get paid. So I had to invoke what's called the Commercial Broker Lien Act, where I actually had to put a lien on my own building that I'm selling, that I represent the seller and the buyer for, and had to hire Fox Rothschild, a big law firm, to do all this. And lo and behold, we get to the settlement table, and there's 800 lawyers. The buyer's got a lawyer. The seller's got an attorney, the bank has an attorney for the mortgage, the foreclosure, like there's a million attorneys there. And this seller brings an enforcer to the settlement table because he's hired to break my legs so I don't collect my commission. And thankfully, Roland has a security detail and knew who this person was and told them that I'm off limits or his family is in peril. So, the long and short of the story is you always surround yourself with people who know more than you. Refer things to people like Eric so things like this don't happen. And it is really it's a good learning lesson. It's how I cut my teeth, but like for people moving forward, there's many easier steps and much more learning to be done. So to become a professional in the commercial realm, there's things that you need to know, and some of it's language. In residential, people ask, do you like this house? But in commercial, people are asking, what's the yield? What's the risk? And what's the exit strategy? So we're going to talk about terms that people are going to ask in commercial, things that you should know: cap, net operating income, triple net lease, gross versus modified, return on investment, and value add. So we're going to ask about the term, what those terms mean. And leasing is not selling. A lot of mistakes residentials do when working with commercial leases. So we're going to go into some of the pitfalls that people fall into. Another aspect is the money is structured differently, and understanding debt service, cash flow, underwriting, and tenant strength, those determine how the money is structured. But always know someone like Eric. Like Eric's a great referral source that if you have someone who wants to buy or sell a building, it might be easier to just call Eric and be like, hey, I want to refer this to you because the risk and liability, like I said, what you don't know can hurt you. So, like I said, residential people often ask, can I see myself living here? What are the questions, Eric, that commercial buyers are asking?
So the commercial, it depends on what we're talking about, right? So, in a multifamily or a retail scenario, you're kind of looking for where the people are versus industrial, you're looking for how quickly can I get a container from the port to my building, or how easy is it to get to my customers, that type of thing. So it truly depends. And this is I'll give an example of what questions they should be asking, because I was half-handed a referral the other day, and who was giving it to me was saying, well, it's a retailer and they want to basically open a shop in this area. And if the area was 20 miles big squared, it was probably more than that. But the question is, what business are you running and who's your customer, and figure out where that business needs to be, or how do I get to the customer easier, or things of that nature. So that if you're looking for the op side, that's where you look for it. From the investment side, it's what's the long-term strategy? Is that building in the right spot for any tenant to utilize your building from a transport standpoint? Is there good population growth or pressure to keep people in there if you're buying a multifamily building? Or if is, are traffic counts still high? Are they still maintaining a good number? Is the neighborhood being kept up from retail perspective? So there's lots of different things to kind of think about depending on what channel you're in the commercial piece of it.
So if someone's looking for an owner-occupied building like the one that you were just discussing, can you give us an example of a property that just looked terrible but was actually a great investment?
Well, so from an owner occupied concept, a lot of bad looking buildings look really good because, and Yuri might be able to attest to this, SBA financing for an owner occupied building is really attractive. So a business looking to plant itself somewhere can find assets that are outside of what I would look for, because there's too much capital to put in and my capital costs are higher. than perhaps a business that can get all the funding that they need right away, and it's based on their growth stream of sales versus, my growth stream of rent, which is going to be so much slower than the sales are created. If that makes sense.
Yep.
I'm trying to, like, an owner user is a different buyer than an investor. We're looking for
Yep.
rate of return on investment for the investor piece. We're looking for the utility of the building and the more of the area that you're going to be able to either service your customer or be able to operate or find labor or whatever for the operator side of that equation. So two different kind of paths.
So let's say you're looking at a commercial mixed-use building that has retail on the bottom and residential tenants up top. What are some of the numbers that you want to look at with that?
One, and this is generally speaking, because these types of buildings come up a lot and specifically, I'm in Doylestown. So between Doylestown and Philadelphia, there's a billion of these buildings. You want to look at the how long the retail has either been there or been vacant, because a lot of times those buildings are, I mean, the seller's going to tell you, oh yeah, absolutely, just lease it out. We just haven't been able to do it. Well, they haven't been able to do it for 5 years, so why should you be able to do it as the investor? But you want to look at the time that that site's been vacant. You want to look at the market rent for what that space should bring in, and certainly underwrite some discount to that for time value. You need to look at what the apartments are bringing in. If there's an issue with them, do you have to put capital in to bring them up so that they can get the highest rents in the market, if that's what you're going for, or at least what you need to look for future costs in your underwriting. Um, I mean, the rest of the stuff is it's kind of you can almost rip it off the internet. You can basically underwrite the rest of it, understanding how much taxes are and how much water and how you split that up. But then again, you start to get in the management piece of it, and it's how do you split up water? How is electricity split up? Do you have to put on sub meters? Do you have to put on, Eamon demons for electricity to try to kind of individually meter each unit? There's a lot of things to look for there, but essentially from the 50,000 foot, you look at what rent is being brought in, is that at market, and what would it take me to get it to market? And then from that mixed use piece, how long has that retail been vacant? What's the market like? If you're walking up and down the street, what's the mix that's already there? You're not going to have seven pizza shops. So what's most likely going to be your tenant? Um, and then you run the risk profile based on that.
So tenants are pretty important in that aspect. How important is like the tenant ratio with all of those pieces that you were analyzing there?
What do you mean by tenant ratio?
Like if you have the commercial tenant, the retail tenant down there, and they're 3 years on a 5-year lease, and they're below market rents versus the upstairs apartments are month to month, and you want to get more stabilization. Like how do you factor those things together?
So, I mean, when we underwrite those buildings, that generally speaking, the multifamily part of that, the apartment piece of that is pretty simple. You're going to likely find a tenant because there's far more people around that need houses than there are businesses that need shop space. So it depends on let's say this building is 4 units with a retail on the bottom. The idea is that you're really toying with that tenant going in or out just based on what it is. If it's a service business like a nail salon or, something that like a FedEx that some people utilize, that's probably a pretty safe,
Stable,
relatively
yep.
speaking. If it's a dry goods store that you could buy it off of Amazon cheaper and faster, I don't know, like, or equally as fast that's a coin toss that they're going to still be there. But the multifamily piece is kind of more of the easy underwriting part to that. If you get larger, like if you're going into 100 units or something, you start underwriting the retail as more of service for the multifamily piece on top of it. And they may not ultimately be, I mean, you can ask market rent, but really what you want is not vacancy on the bottom so that you can service your customers on top because they're bringing you the most value anyway. I mean, in those types of buildings.
Well, let's get into some of the language of commercial. Let's start with some of the basics. How about you explain to us what cap rate is and why it's so important?
Yeah, sure. I try to explain this to my kids in a distance rate time calculation, which if we all remember this from high school, it's a triangle, right? So if you have two of them, you can find the third. So the cap rate is the return that you get if you bought the asset with cash, and it's your net operating income over that purchase price. And so so if you're making $100,000 on $1 million investment, that's a 10% return.
10 cap.
Right.
Yep.
So if as the distance rate time thing, you can then multiply the purchase price by the cap, and that should give you the NOI, and then you can go around the triangle that way. So the cap is really just what your if you paid full cash for an asset and you underwrote everything, like basically the bottom end of a P&L, that's your net operating income. Um, that gives you your cap rate. So that's a return model.
Can you explain like net operating income to people here in the most simplest term?
Sure. It is total revenues, total income from the project, from the property, less your normal operating expenses prior to debt service and any other accounting, you know, depreciation or things like that. So it's literally the cash in versus what you're going to be cashing out for expenses. That's the net operating income. And then once you pass off debt service and that's when you get into cash flow. But the net operating income is really income minus your expenses without debt service.
That's a really good explanation. So let's explain to everyone what a triple net lease is and why investors love triple net.
You love it because you can buy them across the country and it doesn't matter. So the nets are the operating expenses of a property. And if you go, let's a triple net is I as a landlord simply take rent for my building, and the tenant takes care of, it depends on who pays it, but they who physically pays it, but they will pay as additional rent property taxes, property insurance, all the maintenance on the property. So if you kind of take it from, if you drove past a Wendy's, let's just pick that. Wendy's is sitting on a piece of property with a building. If I own that Wendy's, and then Wendy's is paying me 6 grand a month, but they're taking care of every other expense, all of those things I added on, plus all of their operating expenses for their business. So I literally only get one check, and that's my net rent coming in. I kind of preface that by saying sometimes we'll bake in the cost of um, sewer and water and property taxes because those are things that if the tenant doesn't pay it, they can lien your property and it just causes a headache. So sometimes we take that in as an estimate and then pay it and then charge them back. But the triple net is the idea that it's just mailbox income. I can own a Walgreens in the middle of Idaho and they're just cutting me a check. I really don't need to see it. You know, they're going to contact me if the building burns down type of thing.
That's it. Yeah, it's a great explanation. Triple net lease is what all the investors really like because they don't have to take care of any of the responsibilities with the taxes, insurance, etc.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit, when you're leasing these properties out, the difference between a gross lease and a modified gross lease.
So, so again, I can kind of go back to how I try to describe this to my kids. I picture it as kind of a wedding cake. If you think of the tiers of this, so a wedding cake, the full right before anybody cuts into it, that's a gross lease. It covers everything. So you're making, as the tenant, you're making one payment to the landlord that covers every operating expense that's in the building. It's electricity, it's water and sewer, it's insurance, it's base rent, it's maintenance. But I pay, in my example, $7,200 a month, and the landlord takes care of all those things, but I don't have any control over it. They control that. Versus you start paring it down and you say, okay, a modified gross is the landlord's going to take in all that stuff except for electricity. So that's where the tenant gets the electrical meter in their name and they pay that direct, but they pay all the other expenses to the landlord, and the landlord then peels off water and sewer and makes that check payment and whatever. So, and then you kind of pare that down in the wedding cake concept to the base layer, which is your triple net. That's your base triple net lease. So the idea is that all these expenses end up getting paid. It's just who pays it and how, like, who cuts the check and who makes the payment. So triple net is the base level, don't need anything else. And then full gross, which you typically get in like an office building, like a multi-story office building, that's going to be full gross. That's going to be all on the landlord to manage those expenses.
Yep, excellent. So, in residential, we have, these are like fix and flip properties. We call, value add. So, what are some examples of a value add in a commercial investment for a building or like a leased up building that's under market rents because there's some deferred maintenance and things like that? What would be like, give us an example of some value add that you've done on some real estate properties. You get
Um,
it, lease it up, and clean it up, stabilize, and get rid of it.
Yeah, a lot of that they come in kind of two general concepts. One is mismanaged, or shall I call it undermanaged. So that's where the landlord doesn't necessarily know what the market rent is. So if you happen to understand that tenants in a building are paying $12 a square foot a year, triple net, to keep using the language, and you know that market is $16 a square foot a year. I mean, that's $4 worth of value that the landlord isn't realizing, but they can't really sell it on that because they're not receiving it. So you could go in and negotiate a deal based on $12 rents, re-tenant it, make it attractive, however you want to do that, put paint on it, whatever, and then be able to release those spaces at $16 and realize the value gain on that. And that's where if anybody's got their pen and paper, you can just start writing out how you do this in a cap rate scenario and just increase the NOI at the same cap rate and the value goes up. So if you put $100,000 in and that change between $12 and $16 is $1 million, I mean, pretty good return.
Yep. So, like if someone's looking at a strip center and you don't have any real anchors in there, like give an example of, getting some new tenants in there with an anchor and what that does to the value add.
So there's, I don't know. I think if you ask ICSC, there's like seven different types of retail centers out there. But under that scenario, if you've got something, and there's a couple that definitely pass some between here and Philadelphia, but just underperformers, right? Either the landlord's not maintaining it based on what they're getting in income, or there's like no real bug light. If you're not big enough to have an anchor, you need to have a bug light, which means it's got to be, you know, it's got to look good. It's got to be, attractive. The retailer who's going in there has to think that their customer is going to want to go there too. So then you start looking around at tenant mix, and if you pass a center that has vacancies and whatever, that's when you start looking at what's in a 3 mile radius of that going either direction. You say, okay, well, there's a pizza place that's 2 miles away. Sure, we could get another pizza place in here. We could do this, we could do that. And then you start backing in what the cost would be to put those things in. Restaurants, as example that I just made, are pretty expensive. And generally speaking, they don't have the funding to do the improvements. So you got to make the the risk assessment with who you're putting in there. But yeah, I mean, if you've got some vacancy and you can put a nice new facade or paint it up and put new asphalt down, and everybody thinks it's almost a brand new center, um, and you can, I mean, the operating expenses are going to be what they are, but I mean, there's definitely ways to create value by looking for who's around. Maybe they're not marketing it properly. Get a professional. There's a plug. Get a professional and have them put it on CoStar as opposed to the MLS, because CoStar, Crexi, LoopNet, frankly, Facebook. If you're looking for smaller tenants, that's Facebook and Craigslist are good places. But not a lot of deals that I see come from Bright. So there's just different ways to market. So if somebody's not doing that, you can pick it up and put that marketing in place. Maybe put professional management in there and make it attractive to somebody. Maybe make interesting deals that they're not willing to make, like percentage rent or something like that. Um, there's, definitely opportunity to find those.
For sure. So the last like terminology question before we go there, there's a big difference between commercial leases and residential leases. Um, and I'm going to ask you like the first question will be like, what are some of the biggest mistakes that residential people get into when they're dealing with commercial leases? But a lot of residential people don't know to put in TI into commercial leases. Can you explain a little bit about what TI means and how that's factored into some of these commercial leases for like office space?
Sure. Well, I think the fundamental understanding is that if you're wandering in with a tenant, you're bringing that landlord value that's going to go against his debt service. So the DSCR thing that Yuri mentioned early on, debt service coverage ratio, like that's a big factor in, I'll say, most commercial deals out there. So it's not just necessarily somebody bringing somebody to a house to make the mortgage payment. Like it is a mortgage payment, but it's just a little different. I have to maintain a certain level above what my mortgage payment is in income to not get in default in the loan. So I, bringing the tenant in, am going to help this landlord out by making sure this payment gets made. So some of those pitfalls are, because I'm bringing that value, can I ask for free rent? Let's start there. Can I ask for free rent to put my tenant improvements in? And then can I get monies from the landlord to do that? Like we're negotiating a deal right now for a restaurant that market is really probably 150. It's a shell building. So market's probably $150 a square foot for a new restaurant in, there's a lot of factors here, but just talking the TI piece, market's 150. We managed to get $200 a square foot in TIs, just because of certain reasons, but that's the value of the tenant coming in, the way that it's going to create a mix for the landlord, the credit worthiness of the tenant, that's another one. One-offs, they're really risky. If you've got either a local operator or chain, they probably have some momentum going. So the odds of them making their rent payments higher, so you might be able to ask for a little more. Um, there's usually personal guarantees on that, and maybe there's a way that you can negotiate off the guarantee or have it be a rolling 1 year. Nobody likes to have their name personally on something if they're trying to put a business in there, but that's just kind of the way the business works. But yeah, there's a lot of little nuances that, and then let alone the legalese that gets into the weird parts of stuff. But the main pitfalls that I think you were alluding to were, if you can get free rent based on if the space was used for A and it now needs to be used for B, can you get dollars from the landlord because you're bringing them value? Will they give you money to secure that loan, that lease in place? Um, like how are your CAMs and operating expenses shared? Are there additional fees on top of that? Again, the example I'm giving is we're paying our pro rata share of the expenses, but they're also tacking on a 3% admin fee, just a cash grab. Thanks very much. And can you negotiate that off? Can you pay that in a different way? Can you decrease base rent because they're taking that? It just depends. Those are all the little things that you kind of start going through. How much insurance you got to carry. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
there's
there's a lot of,
plenty. It's not just as simple as I
yeah,
want to
no,
go rent that apartment and I'm going to stay there for a year. You're probably entering into an agreement that's going to be
yeah.
3, 5, 10. The deal that I'm talking about is a 10-year deal. So, I mean, you got to kind of think a lot in the front end to not leave something hanging open in year 4.
And for those who didn't understand when Eric said CAM, that's common area maintenance. So that there's going to be an expense on top of your lease payment on a percentage basis based on what the common area maintenance for that building is going to be. So what pitfalls do you see that residential agents miss when they're trying to negotiate these commercial leases? Because there's so many aspects of commercial leasing. You just routed off like 10 different aspects that are not in residential.
Um, I can't say there's any. I will say this: free rent is absolutely the one that never gets asked, or it's not, or negotiated well enough. Like there's some that's the one that generally speaking people kind of just pass over. But it's just because of all these little nuances. I can just say that you can A, tell a residential agent when they walk in because they don't ask for certain things. And then B, you sometimes sit there and you say, you're not doing your client a service and you might be exposing your broker to some stuff here if you don't know what to ask for. And the exposure to the broker is that client then gets perturbed that their agent didn't ask for certain things or they're paying way too much versus what market is, and they just get into a bad deal and then people get angry. And frankly, commercial's the Wild West and it's CYA all the time.
Oh, big time. Yeah, no, and yeah, in residential we have some exclusivity, and in commercial that's kind of out the window. It's everyone fares for themselves out there. Um, and in some of these leases, these commercial leases, they're based on a company's revenue. So, like, how does that affect a lease? How does that, you know, work into play that a client, for if you're a landlord, betting money based on the income of the business coming in.
Yeah, so the that's where it kind of goes back to, okay, if there's no pizza shops around, any decent operator can do somewhere between 700 to $1 million. I mean, it all depends on traffic count, but or houses around a 3 mile radius. That's about where that comes from. But you could basically calculate how much a good pizza shop should do if they're operated well. For other dry goods, that's difficult, but restaurants in general, this is kind of the way it goes because they're so expensive to put in. Because um, just as example, the the vent hoods over the
Oh
grill
yeah.
stuff in the back, that's usually $10,000 to $12,000 a lineal foot, and they're no less than 10 feet long. So, I mean, that's a general statement, but you're already 100 grand in and you haven't even done anything. And then you got to pipe it out. So, there's a lot of costs associated with that. So, in a landlord situation, I might say, look, your base rent's going to be, I think you're going to do $2 million in gross sales here, but I'm going to make base rent $5,000 a month. Once you hit a certain break point, I'm going to share in the upside because you've covered all your costs, you've paid me the base, and now we're kind of talking the gravy piece. So there might be a percentage of that increase that the landlord gets because you're hitting out of the park. They gave you a bunch of money to do it. They're sitting on a good location that, provided that they operate it well, shouldn't go down. So maybe there's some good for the gander concept there.
So you were, a little bit ago, we were talking about DSCR. How about explaining to everyone like why that is so important, at the basic level?
So at the basic level, because that's investment, that's the basis of investment real estate, right? So if you've got, and there's no way I can do this in my head because I barely graduated high school, but the if you've got a loan, the covenants of the loan will say your debt service coverage ratio has to be 125% of what the payment is. So net after all the expenses, so your net operating income, you need to be able to be at 125% of your debt payment to be able to do this loan. If you drop below it, the bank can call you in default, which means that you can't just make bad deals. Everybody thinks that rent should go up. So the loan gets more safe from the lender standpoint, and you make more money as the investor. But that's a really tricky play if you've got a restaurant that's beginning to fall off and you're on percentage rent with them and they're not operating as well as they should, or the brand's getting tired or whatever. And you're starting to look at how close you're getting to that covenant of that one of potentially 10 covenants in the loan, but this one being debt service coverage ratio. So as you go into an investment, you kind of have to underwrite what that payment's going to be and whether you can re-tenant and get yourself into a safe position so that if tenants go in and out, you're not banging through the covenant. or the ratio that you need to hit, or you're going to be far past it because you know that you're going from $12 rents and you're buying it based on that. And once they go to 16, in my example, you're more than covered. So if one or two tenants go out, that you're still not going below this line. Like it's really the basis of income producing investment real estate. That's where that loan sits.
So when you're in that situation and you're replacing tenants, can you explain to everyone what the difference is between having like a local tenant and a national credit, tenant in there?
So the bank, and you should too, but the bank's going to underwrite because they're your partner in this. Sometimes they don't act like they should, but they're your partner in it. And are going to say that McDonald's, let's just use the biggest hamburger seller on the planet. That McDonald's is going, if you went to sell a lease with a McDonald's operator, or specifically if it's company operated, but let's just say that there's a franchisee of McDonald's. They're going to say, okay, that's a really good brand. You know, we're gonna underwrite that at a 6% cap, right? Then let's go back to that. So they're going to underwrite that as at a 6% cap. That's the risk that they're willing to put on that tenant. For some reason, McDonald's just evaporated, and now Carl's hamburger shop shows up. And Carl just loves cooking in his backyard, and he thinks he should start this restaurant idea. As the underwriter of that, I'm going to put Carl at like a 15% because my risk of him being successful is the risk is so high because we all know 80% of restaurants fail or whatever that is. So Carl's hamburger shop is likely going to fail because Carl can't cook and run a business at the same time. It just doesn't seem to work out. Versus McDonald's is a well-oiled machine where they have tons of corporate support. They won't pick a location that's going to be unsuccessful. Like there's a whole lot of things that go into that. And Carl just likes it because it's near his house.
Yeah, that's a great example, a steady income coming in from a McDonald's. And a lot of residential realtors will look at cap rate and say just because it has a high cap rate, you know, it, it they're like it must be a good investment, but a high cap rate can be a bad investment because you don't know how if you have long-term tenants with longevity. So, can you give some other examples how like high cap rate doesn't necessarily mean good investment?
So generally speaking, high cap rates not only relate to the credit worthiness of the tenants, it also relates to the term of the lease. Um, you can have a Walgreens, which is, you know, pretty decent credit, or was, but let's just go, Rite Aid's the problem, but Walgreens as the better one because people see them all the time. But you can see a Walgreens as being a great tenant unless they're sitting at 2 years left of a 25-year deal and they either built a new store within 2 miles or whatever. Like there's factors that go, or Rite Aid's next door and they're stealing the thing with all Walgreens, just to let you guys know, it has nothing to do with what they're selling in the store. It has everything to do with the prescriptions that they're doing. So now you've got a problem because you've got a Rite Aid next door. They built a different Walgreens on a better corner a mile and a half away, and you got Amazon delivering pills. So what's the likelihood of that Walgreens that's been there for 25 years extending their lease with you? So that kind of factors into why that Walgreens might be trading at a 10 cap versus a 6 or a 4 if it's a brand new lease or something.
That's
So
awesome. Good explanations here. So this is the part where I think it's important for people who do residential to be referring to commercial people. If you don't know what you're doing, like Eric's given great examples so far. Now, at what point when you're having a residential agent have a conversation with their client, should they bring in a commercial specialist like you?
um early, early. I mean the bigger so
Yeah,
we
you don't want
we
to put out a fire. You want
yeah, you
to
don't want to.
preemptively.
But you also want to be on the front end of the thought process too, because we've been talking a lot about retail because it makes a lot of sense to people. If I'm buying an industrial building, as example, we're buying a 10-acre piece that's on a river. It's got nothing but big trucks on it, and there's a truck there's a couple of truck, maintenance facilities. Well, now you're talking about environmental. Now you're talking about easements. Now you're talking about so many other things that go into, should you even buy this? Should you lease from here? What's your exposure if you go and lease a space that looks like it's been contaminated? Like there's a lot of things that kind of, I mean, it doesn't hurt you, but you just got to know what to ask for, what to put in the lease, or what to look for when you're purchasing. And that's where you can't get all the way down the road and have 3 days left on your due diligence and say, oh, we never thought of environmental. We should do that. Well, that's a month and a half away. Like, no,
Oh
you're
yeah, and if you like, as some people don't know, with industrial, you'll get a phase one environmental, and if you have something like Eric is explaining, that will call out for a phase two all day long, and then it gets expensive and more in depth. Actually, you want to discuss like, on that same topic, what, phase one versus phase two environmental looks like?
Sure. So there's a particular property around here that happens to be a dry cleaner that, and just for everybody on the call, if you're ever dealing with a dry cleaner facility that you're going to purchase, it is contaminated. I'm just going to tell you that it's contaminated. But the idea that somebody then, not you, a professional engineer, like a scientist, will go around and look at stuff and say, yeah, I think that's contaminated, or there's probability of contamination here. Let's let's go and do a little more exploration. And the exploration might be, I mean, I've seen it as easy. I used to run 1,200 gas stations, so I've seen pretty much the spectrum of this whole thing. Some of it's as easy as putting the dirty dirt in a baby pool with an enzyme in it, and over time it just kind of goes away. Or it's just monitoring the contamination to make sure it doesn't walk off the property lines, and over time, dirt just kind of handles itself and it'll clean itself out. Dry cleaners, on the other hand, their contaminants will go directly to bedrock and you won't be able to get them out. And then if it hits groundwater and starts heading off your site, there's a big problem. So the phase two is we're going to go and dig, or we're going to create a plan in place here so that we tell the DEP what we're doing, and then we start monitoring, and then it's a constant check that goes out until the levels of whatever the contaminants are go down far enough. And I'll just give you an example. I used to own the site at 5th Street and 313. There's a gas station there that went to auction. I bought it at auction because it was contaminated. And again, I've done this, so I'm not saying anybody do this, whatever. I called my engineer, I gave him the numbers. He said, "Yeah, go ahead and buy it because ultimately it's not that big a deal for an environmental thing." And what we just had to do was continually monitor it and provide the reports to the DEP so that they saw the trend lines of what the contaminants were kind of head south, so that they said, we don't have any trend line. Now we're going to create a trend line. Once it goes down, they can say, okay, we know that if there's no more contamination, i.e., you've taken the tank out of the ground that's not leaking anymore, we can see the trend lines going to zero at some point in the future. We'll release you from liability and you can get an act two. But those are all the little things that go into it, and you got to
Yeah,
know
for
who to
sure.
call.
So yeah, I got into real estate because I said everyone I know lives somewhere and they work somewhere else. So, what commercial opportunities do residential agents commonly overlook, you
So
think?
I think the biggest one that's overlooked is not having that conversation. So here's, if I were talking to residential agents, which I think I am, I would say get 5 people who you trust in either, retail, industrial, multifamily, land. You get 5 pros that you can trust, that you would have a relationship with on passing somebody off, or have people within an area that you trust that can handle 90% of what the transactions are out there. And while you're talking with your customers about houses, have the conversation about, well, what do you do for work? What can we help you with that? Because there's so many missed opportunities with somebody who's a managing director of something that has some power, or that run their own business, or that are starting a side gig or whatever, and you don't have the answer because that's out of your bailiwick, but you might have one of these 5 people be able to help them, which then creates a referral concept there. And that's where, I mean, there's everybody's talking to everybody all the time, and there's always something to talk about in real estate. I just would recommend the residential agents have a cadre of professionals that they trust, or at least one that, and I'm
Yep.
happy to, you guys can have my contact number, but at least one just to bounce the initial off of to say whether this is, something that would be good to go down the road and kind of pursue. I will say this too, just to caveat everything I just said. Commercial deals on a referral basis generally don't go like that. They take a lot of time. Again, if you're trying to find a site for somebody, it is not tomorrow. It is, 9 times out of 10, it's a really long search. You're calling a lot, you're losing a lot of deals. Like there's a lot of things that go into it. So that referral kind of sits out there for a while, but ultimately, I think if you got enough lines in the water, you'll start getting paid off of them. But I just tell people
Exactly.
when they give me referrals in particular, I say, look at do not expect a check next month because this is a long kind of growth concept.
So that leads me to my next question, because you were even asking in the beginning, like residential realtors have clients who want to invest in properties or own investment properties in commercial. Like, what are some of the questions that the agents should be asking their clients before they link in a commercial specialist?
So there's kind of I'll say there's two ways of investing in real estate. There's either active, which means that I'm buying the asset, I'm managing it, I'm talking to the tenants, I'm doing the whole bit, or there's the passive, so it's general partner, limited partner. And I'm trying to really structure this down because your client might be an active investor in real estate. So now you've come to the T intersection. Are they buying it and owning it and operating it themselves, or do they invest in it through other general partners or opportunities like that, but they just understand it? So we do both. We put together limited partnerships. So we bring in the people that don't want to do the management piece of it, but like the real estate from an investment standpoint. And we also deal with people who want to own and operate their own real estate. So that's kind of the two ways to go about it. So the questions to your potential customers or the customers for the residential side that you're asking about commercial is, are you kind of an active buyer? Are you a passive investor? Because there's all these different ways of helping that person get investing into real estate. It just depends on what their appetite is from fully managed, talking every day and cutting the grass to I just want to check, but I want to make sure that I'm invested into industrial real estate in the Northeast or whatever that is.
Yeah, finding out what their appetite is and what their investment strategy is. Exactly. That is a fantastic program. We asked a lot of questions. Eric did a great job out there fielding them, explaining them in a simplified way. Does anyone have any questions for Eric while we still have him? Is there anything that you would like to see us do in the future with residential and commercial? All right. I guess with that, I'm going to hand it back to Lisa. Eric, a great job today. Thanks so much for making the time available to us. I think we gave people a lot of good tools out there, and I look forward to more of these with you. And yeah, keep Eric in mind. Like there's a lot of commercial aspects. People are investing in industrial and light industrial and multifamily and retail strip centers. There's a lot of different branches of commercial. So, whatever your client's interest is, make sure that you consult with someone who's been there, done that, so you don't wind up having an enforcer at the table with you to make sure that they can take your commission from you.
Where you got to have a bigger enforcer.
Yeah, you gotta have a bigger enforcer. Yeah, Roland Cassis tells that story all the time, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, but that definitely scared my wife.
Yeah, Victoria just, she's still on. More explanation on commercial market, how to look for it and how to advertise it too. So I'm not sure, Victoria, if you're still on, is there like a specific area you want, or you're just talking about in general for the committee to do?
You get to advertise for free on CoStar, LoopNet, Crexi. You can list all your properties for free, but like you have to pay to target market them. You can get access to every person who's ever owned this type of building and direct mail to them or contact with them. Um, Maybe Eric, you want to tell us a little bit how you market some of these commercial properties that you have?
Yeah, so these commercial platforms are really stinkers in a lot of ways. Um, so CoStar is LoopNet's owned by CoStar, Apartments.com is owned by CoStar. You can list for free, but to get the back end data, you pay for, and it ain't cheap. And then Crexi is the same way. You can list it for free, but to get any data from it, like who's looking at your site, can you blast email them from their platforms? They're all trying to kind of scour for the data piece of it, much like Bright has done. But yeah, you get to hit the mark, and this is again the exposure to the broker. If you're selling something and you sold it for $1 million, but you didn't know that there was a $3 million buyer out there because you just didn't have the data, that's a problem. But to list on those sites definitely gets it out. It then syndicates out to a bunch of other sites that they're either related to or whatever. But yeah, you have to, as a commercial agent, you've got to subscribe to all this to have the data on the inbound side so that you can say, here's the market, here are the comps, here's what's available. And not everybody lists everywhere. So you got to kind of mine from all these different directions. And then the real work comes in and taking all that stuff in because they're not integrated with every CRM you have. You got to inbound it to your CRM somehow, scrub it, and then upload it. It's kind of a tedious thing. It's not as simple as Bright, right? And from the Keller Williams perspective, they've got it all figured out. It's a well-greased wheel. Like commercial is a bit of a Frankenstein product.
And it can be, just like Eric said, expensive. When I first subscribed to CoStar almost 20 years ago, it was $2,000 a month to get the data. So, like when you do it one commercial deal, I mean, it can pay for itself, but it's not for the faint of heart financially.
Nope.
Well, I think that's it. There's no more questions, but thank you, Frank, thank you, Eric, for your expertise. And everyone on this call, if you're not already a member of our commercial committee, Eric is the chair. And we'd love to have you join. We meet a few times a year. We just had something a few months ago in person, and Eric brought a speaker in, an attorney, right, Eric? I think it was an attorney talking about
Yep. Nate
yeah.
Fox from Obermeyer. He
Yes,
land use guy, done a ton of
right,
lease deals, done a ton of purchases, so well seasoned in commercial real estate.
right. So, and there's always, options to email our chair or to email us, and we can pass it along. Also, if you're not involved in the education, Frank is the co-chair of the education committee, and that committee is the one who plans these Zoom power hours. So, if you have an idea, send it to Frank, send it to me, and we'll definitely discuss it and hopefully can provide it for you. But next month we have one in July with the Tech Helpline, which is one of the most valuable resources to BCAR members. So take a look for that and sign up or listen to it afterwards. So thanks everyone. Enjoy your day and
Thanks, Eric.
we'll
Thanks,
see you
Lisa.
soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thanks guys.
Yep.
Take
Bye
care.
Appreciate it.
bye.